recommend, get into that and really take advantage of these two incredible guest speakers, as well as Jacqueline, to get any of your ideas floated or anything like that. So audience participation, very, very highly encouraged. With that, we do ask that we don't do any self-promotion through the question and answer. It is about an interactive discussion, and we're actually doing that, trying to discuss various different topics. We've got some pretty cool minds here today, and Jonathan being a futurist, it's really cool to start socializing some of those ideas. At the end of the session, and we'll get you to start thinking about that right now, is we're going to have that soapbox session. It is 30 seconds to jump on your soapbox, highlight a project that is really, really pertinent to this particular subject, something that may have an impact on the Central Coast or broader, or even if you're asking for help for various different things, jump on that soapbox. It is limited, so just in the chat, if you can just put soapbox and your contact details, and at the very end, when we're coming up to that, we'll highlight the first 5 that have gone through to do that. So that's the rules of engagement this morning. Sit back and enjoy, ask the challenging questions, get into the discussion, and let's see where we can go with this smart cities concept.
Thank you, Jacinta. We'll get kicking off with our first question, but my caveat for this morning is the future of cities is so big, and we only have an hour and a half. So we're going to do our very best to give you some ideas, some concepts, and have some really robust discussion, but we just know we can't cover everything. We'll try our very best though, I promise. So Jonathan, let's get straight into it. My first question is for you. We would love to hear from you what trends and concepts you have seen around the future of cities, both in the US and globally, that might inspire us here on the Central Coast. And what are the pillars of a future city?
Thank you so much. And by the way, I'm just thrilled to be part of this. I'm trying to have a bit of Australian breakfast with you. Here it's the afternoon in California, so I'm trying to go with the spirit of it. So real pleasure to be with you. I would love to be with you in person, but hey, nature had a different plan, right? So I have 4 areas that I wanted to bring attention to. In my role, both leading technology at the city of Palo Alto, and then as a person who is advising governments around the world, I see lots and lots of different trends. And one of the things that one quickly recognizes is that what matters is dependent on each city, right? And so a city, basically a smart city, reflects the culture and needs of a particular area. It's very hard to standardize or generalize, but there are 4 areas that have jumped out to me as I've done my work and research and worked with cities around the world. I'll go through each of the 4. I'll just list them right now, and then I'll give you some detail. The first is digitalization. I'll come back to that. Second is transportation. Third is sustainability. And 4th is energy. So probably none of those are a surprise to your audience and yourselves. But I wanted to kind of go a little deep into each. Digitalization is probably the most obvious. And it's really taking the hundreds and thousands of processes that governments do every single day, and taking a good look, reviewing and prioritizing ones that could be made digital, that could be delivered and used via a browser or a smartphone. Increasingly, people want to interact with government on their smartphone. We know this. And it's a massive opportunity, by the way. As we say here, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. If you're kind of trying to figure out what area to really focus on and show results quickly, digitalization is the best way to go. When I think about the work I did in Palo Alto, one of the areas that we made some improvements that were significant on was the permitting process. Permitting, right? big piece of any city. You got to be able to request a permit, get the permit reviewed, and then approved. And in many cities, the permitting process is very analog. There's a lot of touch points. There's a lot of paperwork. And we, at the city, myself and my colleagues, we digitalized most of it. And for example, in some cases where permits were taking 3 to 4 weeks, they were taking now a day, maybe even a couple hours. And in some instances, there was no human intervention. We were able to process them simply online automatically for our community. Another aspect of digitalization is using data, right? One of my observations is, you know, I moved into government and there was never enough time, never enough money, too many priorities. It was a world of limitations. But the one thing I quickly recognized was there's a lot of data. There's abundant data because we collect it and produce it as a consequence of running our cities. And there's an opportunity for cities to step up and start to use data in a very strategic way. The private sector has figured this out. You know, the private sector uses data for, you know, acquiring customers, for making better decisions, for understanding the marketplace, for designing better products. But government's been slow in this. It's been slow. Now, there's some outlier governments that are doing fabulous work, but this is a real strong opportunity. Take what we have. We don't have to reinvent anything here. We have the data, and use it to drive city decisions, to create more transparency, to allow even the community to co-create with you. So data presents an awesome opportunity. The next category is transportation. And, you know, as I travel, when I was enjoying jumping on planes and going to exotic cities, those were the days, right? Those are the days. I've been homebound here since March. We're shelter in place here in Northern California. When I was getting on planes, and it was quite often, you know, I get to some airport somewhere in the world, and maybe I would get in a taxi or a van, and I would hit traffic. And it didn't matter if that was in Melbourne or in Rio or in Paris, I would hit that traffic, and you could see that congestion and the effects of cars were significant. You know, not only is it just frustrating to drive around a urban environment, but there's a lot of carbon being emitted. In fact, it's one of the major contributions towards our climate emergency. So there's huge opportunity in trying to figure out a better way to move people and a better way to move products. And by the way, you know, some of it is simple, right? Is adopting a cycling culture, right? Here in America, we've only, in North America, or I should say United States, we only discovered cycling a few years ago, you know, when a lot of the world was already there. But it makes a big difference. There are still a lot of communities around the world that haven't embraced it. I remember one story, and it's a story of meeting the deputy mayor in Paris several years, probably about 8 years ago. And he said, you know, he was seeing what was happening in many cities about adopting bicycles. And the discussion came up in Paris. Why don't we embrace bicycles? And the general sort of zeitgeist at the time was Parisians won't ride bicycles. It's not very cool. It'll be a big failure. This is real. They really believe this. So they said, you know what, let's try small. So they rolled out, I think, about 1,000 bicycles, and immediately they were used. You know, these bicycles you can pick up from racks around a community. And they said, well, that was kind of cool. They then rolled out another few thousand, and immediately. And today, it's remarkable. In less than 10 years, Paris is full of cyclists. They've made the leap. And you might think, well, this is about smart cities. Isn't it about tech? No, often it's about simple ideas. Simply going from, you know, in this case, using motorized vehicles into bicycles. Let me move to sustainability because I want to be conscious of time. Look, if you believe the scientific consensus, and I know you do, and I certainly do, we are in a climate emergency. It's kind of an existential threat to us over the next few decades and over this century. And we're going to fix it in cities. Cities will be the primary place where if we come together, we do some smart things, we can either reduce the impact or stabilize it. I think we're probably too far ahead in terms of reversing it, but let's see what the science can tell us. And there's some really interesting things being done. Again, you might be expecting me to talk about tech, but I want to talk about trees. I want to talk about trees. There's a phenomena of creating urban forests. If I look at some of the great cities of the world, for example, Mexico City, and you might say, well, it's a beautiful city already, but what can they do about all the carbon and the impacts they're having on climate? And well, they're planting a lot of trees. In China and India, they have these tree planting days where they're planting literally, I'm not kidding, millions of trees in one day, because trees not only make the city more beautiful, but they also make the air cleaner, and they reduce heat. They become a place for reducing heat. So smart cities are thinking about urban forests and converting streets and highways even into green spaces. Finally, I just wanted to touch on energy. We are in the opening years of an energy revolution, right? And again, we're probably going to see it manifest entirely in, mostly, I should say, not entirely, mostly in an urban center. And the big move, the big change, of course, in many countries in the world is the movement towards solar. Solar seems to be sort of in the lead right now in terms of cost and innovation. Wind power is very successful and is being highly adopted too. Between those two, you've got a big chunk of the non-carbon based energy. One realization is there's nothing near term where we can eliminate a carbon-based like coal, oil, and gas. We have to have a mix, and over time, as the cost model makes sense, we will get to more and more non-carbon energy, and this is really important for our climate, of course, for air quality in our communities, and also if you think about as we move cars to electric cars, it reduces the noise. It reduces the noise of our cities, and that's a health factor. Now, there's a ton more I can share, but those are the four big pillars and the four trends that I'm seeing all around the world.
Much. That was excellent, and I'm a huge fan as well of that low tech kind of the easy things that we can do. So that was really great to hear. I think we might take some questions. I believe there's some that's come in from the chat, so I'll hand over to Jacinta to ask some of those.
A great one here about the Central Coast and the challenges of heat due to the lack of canopy coverage. And so therefore then putting the smart cities overlay over the top of that, is there, or have you had a project where you could actually monitor the difference of the heat based on whether or not there is canopy coverage of that city, and as it increases, what effect that actually has, not just on climate, but actually on the community?
Yeah, the science is really clear on this. There's no real debate. Absolutely, the temperature drops. Absolutely, the temperature drops when you start to have this canopy of trees. And you think, and I get the question. In many cities, we've sort of paved over paradise and put up a parking lot. And that cement, that concrete is reflecting heat from the ground into the environment. And so, it's unpleasant. So there's the phenomena called heat islands. Heat islands would actually create this enormous heat in certain areas because of the different materials we use in building our environment. So planting trees densely, creating this canopy, 100% is resulting in actual material drops in temperature. And to your last point of the question, how is this impacting people? That's about quality of life. That means you can have sort of these increasingly pedestrianized area. First of all, you don't have to worry about cars and traffic and the safety issue. Kids can come out and play. It creates more social opportunity because people are out and they're together. This is really important in our communities. And it's more pleasant because you're not dealing with the direct sunshine and the intense heat.
Thank you. And I didn't even put it down into that quality of life. You know, I was sort of looking at it far more from environmental. But you're right. You know, that it increases people outdoor activities and socialising in those community environments. Another amazing question is whether or not demographic, in your experience, whether or not demographic of the population actually has any form of a bearing on the adoption rate of smart city concepts and projects. Specifically, the question is actually around the age of the and aging populations.
You got a smart audience, I tell you. That's another great insight right there. People are thinking about this, and I think it's exactly right. Demographics are one of those macro trends that tells us a lot about the future. You know, if you want to understand where the world's going, or even where an individual country is going, you really got to study demographics. I mean, one part of the world, you have an aging population, and with an aging population, not only is it shrinking, but there's more pressure, more burdens on the social system, because you don't have a large working population anymore. You see that, for example, in Japan. You have a very massive retired older population, so they need a lot of care. You have a small working population, so the income, the tax income base is dropping, and you've got all the phenomena of what older people need, what they enjoy relative to what a younger family would need. So the services and the way in which a city delivers starts to evolve. Now, on the other hand, you have countries like Iran and many countries, by the way, across Africa, where the population is really young. The majorities are under 30. In many cases, they're under 25. The average age is under 25. And, on net, depending where sort of the fourth industrial revolution goes over the next few decades, that young population actually can generate a lot of productivity and prosperity as a result. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but we'll see where kind of automation goes and what the impact will be of that in the long term. I think in terms of providing smart city technology and capabilities, certainly demographics will reflect the kinds of things we do. And I'm thinking about one particular city on the east coast of China, where I don't recall the name just at this moment, but this city has a very high proportion of older people. And a lot of them like to be independent. To the extent possible, older people move in with their children, that's for sure. But lots of people now want to be independent. And the city is providing monitoring services. So, for example, they can see if an older person has fallen over. Perhaps they are in some sort of other significant challenge. There's something happening in the house, little fire or water overflowing. And these sensors and this data can be detected by the city, and they can send out, first responders and services to be able to help those older people. That's a smart city, because that's a city that is actually looking after its majority population.
Thank you. That's amazing insights there. We've got a couple of other questions, but I'm actually going to throw to Michael to answer those ones. And there's a couple of, there's a whole heap of questions coming through now, and we won't be able to get to all of them, but I'm going to try and accumulate about 4 different questions at you now, Michael. So based on the smart city concepts and trends that Jonathan has surfaced, thinking more about delivering of projects and exploring what could be possible in your experience, there's a couple of questions here. So from Kate's sort of saying, now as COVID-19 had an impact on various different things, but in particular transport, and how can we then use that information? There's also accessibility mapping across regions, and a couple of other different, and decentralization based on what has happened now with COVID-19 and into the future. So how can we think about all of these things and use all of that information to harness these trends that Jonathan's spoken about and drive the future of smart cities roadmap here on the Central Coast or in Australia, actually?
Great question. Picking up on Jonathan's point about transport, transport has an origin and a destination, and it has a purpose. So what we've seen with COVID, and particularly for those who work on the coast but have to leave for work, it's challenged the question of whether or not you actually have to leave. For those who are in jobs where you can work from anywhere, being able to work from home or work from a local hub have become a real option. Now, to understand the scale and scope of that opportunity, you need to look at the data. And there's the Opal card data and looking at public transport, and council has access to that, and they're doing a great job analysing that. There's also private motor vehicle data looking at some of the loads going down the M1. You can have some novel approaches to understanding activity locally. Council, of course, is also the water authority, so looking at different usage patterns in different places and whether they've increased over time. But I think the real question around what we can do on the coast relates to choice. And there was a question that was asked about digital connectivity and access, and I think there's a link there between digital access and choice, and digital access and as it relates to transport and place. So I think COVID can be the burning platform for the coast to say, look, here's what we've been able to do, but here's the next horizon for us. We need better digital connectivity so that we don't need to keep investing in multi-billion-dollar transport projects to move people out of the coast for work. There's another side to this argument, which is the first step is, how do you stop the flow leaving the coast? The second then becomes, well, how do you attract and retain activity? And then how do you grow your own? So after we stop the flow, how do we attract? You might find that because of that increase in digital connectivity, because of the way that your local ecosystem is developing, you start to attract businesses from other places, be it because of cost or capability. And then the capability side in terms of human capital and talent, when you have enough of a local ecosystem, as Silicon Valley, Jonathan's in the middle of it, the capital of this for the world, you end up having the talent and the infrastructure to attract the entrepreneurs to keep generating these jobs and new ideas.
Thank you, Michael. Yep, you're absolutely right on that one. Jackie, I'm going to throw to you, and then we might take some more questions from the chat box that we have. What trends, based on all of this that we've heard from Jonathan and Michael, what trends do you see benefiting the Central Coast, and how can our business community, who a lot of them are online with us right now, how can the business community support our regional strategy?
Thank you. So it's really interesting just to take it a step back. So coming from an urban planning by trade background, what we always learn in planning is that the cities really just reflect the values and the culture and the society that's in place at the time. Then we get into disruptors. So the values that we have, of course, are things like health of individuals, health of the environment, efficiency, accessibility, equality. List could go on. When we look at history with disruptors, though, things that disrupted urban planning were things like the invention of the elevator or the lift. So that meant that instead of 3 to 5 stories, you could actually go up to a skyscraper. You can see what's happening in Dubai as an example of what you can do with a lift. We have disruptors like a previous pandemic of cholera, where we invented the widespread sewer for health, which is really what they valued at the time, was health of individuals. I wouldn't want to go back to those days. Before that, we also have the big, of course, the elephant in the room, which is the automobile, which completely changed the pattern of how we design our cities. And I would argue that what we're seeing this year is also almost as big as a disruptor of the automobile. So it's changed both, I think, the values of individuals in how we plan our cities. I think people are starting to value things like their time, time spent with family and friends, time to do what it is that they want to do, and really rethinking how it is that they want to live. So as a disruptor, COVID has, I mean, the health effects aside are terrible, but what we're experiencing now is something that we've never really seen in our lifetime. So the interesting thing for us is that prior to COVID, we've been studying this commuter problem. So there's anywhere from 34 to 44,000 Central Coast residents that leave their house every day to make a pretty significant 3 to 5 hour drive. And the impacts that we were feeling were kind of going against all of those values that we hold to ourselves. So things like the impacts on the environment, I believe it was the equivalent of 3.2 rail cars of coal being burned every day by putting those cars on the road. It's the equivalent of 1 full lane on the M1 in one direction, just the Central Coast commuters. Then of course we had things like the impacts on the quality of life, impacts on our community because we weren't around, things like the gender pay gap, and also in terms of the economy, it was working out to what we estimated to be about $400,000 a day spent in coffee and lunches. So just to hone in on the data, which I find really exciting to hear from Jonathan as well, we've been studying up the data a lot after COVID. And the interesting thing about it is we've been tracking something like, if I take the example of restaurant spend, we've actually seen an uptick in restaurant spend since. So we had a bit of a downturn in April when COVID was really hitting us pretty hard. Since May, it's come up, and almost every town center has experienced an increase of between 15 to 40% year-over-year change in restaurant spending. But this has been at the expense of those traditional employment areas in Sydney. So Macquarie Park, North Ryde, North Sydney, Sydney CBD, they've all experienced a decline in that sector of anywhere between 40 to 80% year over year. So that's a decentralization, I guess, just being shown exactly what that looks like, is that if we retain our employee base here and give people that choice to actually work where it is that they live, the impacts are pretty positive. So we've been studying that up a lot. So I'd say as a whole, that's probably the biggest trend that we're seeing at the moment. So how we translate that into planning is trying to figure out what's the new model of working. Obviously, some people could never work from home. My husband is a carpenter. That's obviously not possible. But for those that can actually work in a different location, whether it's a satellite office, a full-scale move of that business from home, part-time or full-time, it's really giving back that choice. So that's something that we're very interested in doing. And that's what the value that's been driving us to do what we do for the past few months.
Thanks, Jackie. And I love the data. I love the insights. The work that your team's doing is really incredible and will help drive us forward. I guess I want to touch on that second part of that question about the business community. Like, is there anything that they can do to kind of support us with our strategy?
I would say, just thinking, it's so from a government perspective, my perspective, which is shared across multiple people here, some good thinkers in the room, it's always that we have the choice to either lead, guide, or step aside. Often, I believe stepping aside is actually the best way to allow the business community to do what they need to do to provide jobs here for people. Now that means, I guess, what we need the business community to do is really think of new ways of working, and of course put their employees' perspective at the forefront. And that could mean maybe having like a satellite office or dividing up the workforce to allow them to work where it is that they live. Of course, from a corporate perspective, that's collective social responsibility. It also helps with the environment and the community. So I guess it's more having an open mind and thinking differently now, as well, fully recognizing that they're under a lot of strain at the moment. But we would like to help them upskill in some of those areas to let them think differently and survive over the next couple of years.
Yep, good point.
Coming from a business perspective here on the Central Coast, and listening to the data and the information that you're gathering, particularly on the commute, and then therefore what has happened due to COVID with commuters not leaving the coast and the effect that that's had on our villages throughout the Central Coast. What it's doing for me as a business is it's giving me that broader, bigger picture for me to actually understand. So, you know, as council is formulating and gathering these insights, it's actually demonstrating to me as a business what needs to happen from the ground floor up. You know, as a small business here on the Central Coast, we can become quite agile and we can respond to the needs of the residents here on the coast. And we've all seen the towers going up in Gosford, and all of and that's in direct response to people relocating to the Central Coast because of the ease of access to Sydney. What COVID has now done is COVID's pushed us back here. So what we need to do on this ground level is actually, and you've demonstrated that by the increase in our centres, we need to respond as businesses to really stimulate that lifestyle and give those people who have relocated here on the Central Coast something to do and fulfill they're used to this fast-paced Sydney, get anything at the drop of a hat, you know, whereas here we don't necessarily give that. So yeah, I see there's a lot of opportunities that this data, as you capture it and feed it back out to the community, that in a consumable manner that the businesses can respond to and actually, you know, respond to those gaps that are really starting to show up. So, you know, from a business perspective, I see that there's a lot of opportunities here.
And I think that's really important. It's the data sharing. So we are collecting data and we're analyzing it. It is, with the exception of the retail spend data, all of it is publicly accessible data. I feel we should be sharing that out to the business community. Even, I believe it was 2 days ago, Business New South Wales Central Coast released their business sentiment survey. And they did find that businesses are spending a lot of money in areas right now, post-COVID, on things like marketing and advertising and that data collection. So here it is, we're collecting data. We could easily share that data around. That's something that we'd like to pursue. And that would help those businesses take that money away from those areas that they'd have to spend on and shift it more towards the innovation and the research and the development space. So that's very close to my heart as well.
Thanks, Jackie.
So many questions.
Yeah, we'll probably,
and they're really big questions.
Uh-oh.
We've got
As in,
about
like,
5
long.
minutes, I think, for questions if you want to ask a couple.
So I'm just going to randomly pick here because there is just so many good ones. What is the role of the government played in the development of Smart City in areas with multiple layers of government governing a city? What pain points have you seen and what successes?
I would say, so coming from a different country, we've only moved here less than a year ago. And I came from a city that was one of the leaders in open data. And it's been a little bit surprising to me to come to hear and see how the data, it's not as freely shared. I would say during the late March COVID times, there was actually, what we did very quickly is a number of us, including a few that are in this room, we collectively worked together, anyone that was dealing with any economic development area. So we had all the way up from the federal government through the state, the council level, and outside organizations like Central Coast Industry Connect and a few other groups. And we basically came together very quickly, and it was based on trust and that sharing of the open data to really solve the problems and not duplicate services and to provide the best value to the business community at that time. I thought that was very successful, and that's a model that we want to go ahead with and continue and strengthen. So it's really that sharing. We have so many different layers of government, which is very much similar to Canada as well. But it needs to be that open, continuous flow of both data, trust, and information and insights. And it's like that 1 + 1 = 3 model I've always liked. It's that collaborative space. So that, I guess that's more of a positive spin of it, but I'd like to see more of that.
There's also a couple of really good links coming through as well. So we will be sending the chat out so everybody can see all this information because there's some great information. But Zoe has put through a Bendigo project and a link to that project Bob has also put through a project that is a research project around low carbon. There's also Bob has also got another one here. Oh no, it's low carbon again. Yeah, so there's plenty of links there and plenty of questions. So yeah, jump on and we'll
Thank you.
we're getting inundated.
Yeah, that's great. It's always really good to see the interaction and the collaboration that happens in the chat. And we apologise that we can't get to everybody's questions live. I'm going to move on now, Jonathan, to our second half. We've got a few more targeted questions that we'd like to ask you. So, Jonathan, your book, Smart Cities for Dummies, it explores smart city strategy, the role of data, which we've talked about in urban innovation, and ideas for improving quality of life, which you've also touched on. So it's a two-pronged question. Coming from a design perspective, how challenging is smart city development? That's the first one. Secondly, does smart city development require the city, the business, and the community to all be on board?
Yeah, thank you for that. Look, I'll start with a broad point. This work is hard. I mean, the work of government is hard, and the work of running cities is hard. A lot of priorities every day, and so you're not only dealing with, can the smart city strategy effectively compete, or can it be communicated in a way that people understand its value and can be measured? There's two major points that I try to communicate in the book. There's many, but there's two I'll highlight. One is, and this is the first sentence in the book, I say this is a book about people. It's a book about people. People are expecting to open up the first page and I'm gonna go straight into data and artificial intelligence and IoT and that type of thing. When in reality, what I wanted to do is write a book about our future, the future of all of us. And technology is going to play a massive role, but it is about different ideas and solutions to create a better quality of life for everybody, make our communities healthier and more inclusive. So it's hard work. The other great point, the other point that I wanted to say of those two is the term, right? Are we comfortable with smart cities? And I make this point, let's not worry about the term. It's the one that's stuck is smart cities. It's just stuck. It's like, it's with us. So we're gonna go with that one. But it's more about the results than it is about this name. And I think what we have to do when we start this journey is have very clear messaging with our community about what we're actually trying to do. We're actually trying to improve the quality of life of our community members, our businesses, our visitors, through the use of innovation, which includes technology, new ideas and best practices, and new ways of thinking about the role of government and how government is delivered. So it's hard. Those that sort of position it as a technology project, I think they do suffer. I also think those that have a piecemeal approach also suffer. If there isn't a unifying strategy that's been endorsed by the community, endorsed by the councils, by the mayor, by the city leadership, it's going to just show up all over the place and be uncoordinated. That will result, of course, in not as great results. You won't get the necessarily the effect of everyone collaborating on on this core mission. So communication is really key, and tied to that, to make it easy or to make it easier, is this idea of leadership. A couple of my friends have a joke that whenever I'm asked a question, I always say it starts with leadership, and I mean that. I actually mean that. The research, by the way, on projects, right? Projects are notoriously bad at getting the results that they drive at. And by the way, this is across industry, across different types of implementations. And the central and biggest reason why most projects never meet their goals is the absence of good, strong, committed leadership. I'm no kidding. This is what the data says. So who is going to be that leader in the city to champion this? Stick around, be passionate, be there when things aren't going so well, and be, of course, a champion when things are going well. So make sure that you got that leader or that group of leaders in place. For a kind of a grassroots bottom-up initiative in a city to push forward, it can work, but it's going to be a lot harder. Let's get everybody on board. I think the second part about making this easier, and it ties in closely with this this theme of communication, is for there to be a clear vision. Like, what's the point? What's the point of this? I love that there was plenty of metrics that were thrown out there. I'm a very much a fan of that, and to quantify things and qualify what you're saying. And so, is the vision to reduce carbon emissions by 80% by 2030? Is it to stop selling combustion engine cars by 2040? Let's get some really visionary targets in place, because people like that, and they can work towards it. Now, the second part of your question, it was a two-part question. You were asking about sort of who needs to be at the table, what are the stakeholders, who needs to be participating. And my answer always is, it's better to have more than less. You want cities in particular, because they are generally so diverse in points of view and where people come from, you want to be able to capture a lot of voices. And if I look at some, risky and areas of cities that, have struggled with their smart city efforts, it's that they didn't embrace enough people. And, they're halfway through a project or halfway through an initiative, and they get a lot of pushback. People haven't bought into it, haven't been brought on board. You know what? I've been in tech for 30 years. This even applies to rolling out technology projects within a business. You can spend a lot of money, you can try to get all the requirements right, and deploy a product. Your staff, your employees may not use it, or you'll get very poor utilization. You fix that by getting engagement at the beginning and bringing everybody into the conversation as it continues. Now, some other specific guidance I would have to make that complexity a little bit easier is to ensure you have really great governance. Now, I wonder, sometimes I think it's an overused term, but it's an underutilized strategy, right? We talk more about it than we do it. Great governance can get you good results. And, this applies to data governance, security, cybersecurity governance, and governance more broadly. But specifically to your smart city strategy, make sure you got governance in place. And really what that is, that's the sort of guiding principles about how decisions are made throughout the process and who should be engaged in those decisions. I see three layers. I see the strategic governance. These are the folks who, they're probably going to be people who approve money, right? They're going to be council members. There's going to be a city manager or city administrator. That's the strategic. And the general vision and direction. Maybe the leadership I've been telling you about needs to come from the strategic layers too. The second one is tactical. These are the people who are going to be on the project teams implementing things. These are going to be some of the entrepreneurs, those entrepreneurs inside your city hall organization. And they're going to be the people pushing to get things done. And then finally, the last layer of governance is operations. Because, when you actually build something, the work starts when you've built it, not when it's not over when you deploy the new initiative or the new capability into the community. So ensure that you have rigorous, agreed upon governance structures for this smart city strategy. That can help. Now, I just wanted to end on a couple more very specific guidance areas in terms of how you engage people. There's the typical hackathons, of course. They're fun. I always say, I've run many hackathons in my career. And I always say to people, they say, well, the products aren't great necessarily, and some of the products fail. And my answer always to that is, don't focus too much on the end result. It's the process, right? Getting people together, networking, creating new ideas, creating community, those have enormous value. Even if the software or the product at the end of the day isn't that great, you have connected young people, even kids, families, retired people, every part of the community to a central task, and that can be very useful. Finally, of course, we're talking about tech generally today and tech innovation. There are a lot of interesting collaboration platforms that governments and cities should look at. It could be as simple as a Q&A process on Facebook, that's free and easy, right? Or responding to questions and concerns on Twitter. But then you have the very specific solutions like CityLab. CityLab come to mind. And this is a place where community can participate, ask questions, they can co-create together, they can complain, of course, they can get answers, they can connect with other people, and actually make action happen. So I would be encouraging governments and communities to look at innovative online, digital collaboration platforms for unique ways to bring the right people together, get the right people focused, and to be able to get the sentiment of your community so you can be responding to the right things. So that would be, that's my take on this in the short time I have.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was great. And I love the points around leadership, governance, the vision, and bringing everybody along with the journey. I mean, if you don't have that, what's the point in you can have the best vision and strategy in the world, but yeah, you definitely need people to come along with you. So thank you. I'm going to jump straight into Michael, into a question for you. So thinking about all those things that Jonathan's just talked about, you've designed smart city strategies from strategy through to implementation. So from your perspective and experience, what are the challenges that have led to implementation success or failure, and what's worked really well?
Right. So the first point is something that Jonathan said, and that is it needs to be delivering on the vision of the place. And in New South Wales, we've got councils with community strategic plans. They define what the priorities of the council are. So any smart city strategy or roadmap needs to be a way to implement our council meet those objectives. There are a couple of traps. One trap is the engineering-led trap, which is, hey, I've made this really cool thing, you need it, as opposed to starting with, well, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? And of course, you need the engineers to be innovating and producing stuff, but they need to be directed into, what is important for council or, the government. So one of the big challenges for the business community in working with government here is how do you do this at scale? Because you don't want to be doing a series of unique propositions that you can't scale. The real benefit in terms of deployment is scale. So there's this tension between having it hyper-local and contextualized and having it efficiently scalable, transferable. In that respect, you need to understand, going back to Jonathan's point, you need to understand how we govern our places. So, in our local context, we've got transport planning, we've got Service New South Wales that does a lot of our permits, they're state government-led instruments. Then you've got the stuff that council looks after. Waste is such a big part of council budgets right across Australia, waste management, resource management. And then you've got the management of place, the natural environment, your open spaces, even something that might seem as trivial as irrigation. There's a lot of money being spent on watering parks. So there's getting that clarity around what it is that can be done in that market, including procurement, because you need to be able to buy these solutions in a way that creates value for the taxpayer and the community. The other thing that we can't underestimate, and again, Jonathan mentioned it, was in the same way that you would deploy something within your business, you need to have strong foundations. So you need to have the systems that can integrate and be interoperable with the solutions you're seeking to provide. You need to have the talent and people's ability to use what you're offering for them. And I think you need that partner network as well, because from a council perspective, a smart city strategy is more than a smart council strategy. It needs to talk about how you can engage the rest of the ecosystem so that you just turn the engine, you do what you're doing for your clients and community, but you have a broader ecosystem that partners with you to deliver. And an example of that, for example, think of Jackie's point around restaurant spend. So if we were able to understand using data-driven approaches when people are coming, when they're not, when you have capacity, what markets, you can do some micro campaigning with council so that you can activate these places for longer. So that's part of that smart city architecture. I think the other thing that we need to talk about is privacy and trust. We've still been quite lucky in relative terms in Australia where we haven't had many data breaches. We haven't really had a questioning of the social license to acquire and share data. There's a lot of work being done behind the scenes with regard to cybersecurity, or as they call it, the 5 safes in how you share data. But we need to be very diligent with that and have a secure by design approach. When you're looking at these strategies and projects, think about how you can safeguard the data element throughout the project, not at the end. You don't want it to be an afterthought. I think lastly, there's a tension, and council and the business community needs to be aware of this. You have some projects or initiatives that will interact with the customer on a daily basis. Some already have funding sources. So transport, water, power, we all pay for it on a daily basis. Car parking, we pay for it. So they are more likely to be self-funded through the initiative. But there are other use cases that we pay for as a community through our tax base. So be it safety, environmental management, health. So these use cases don't necessarily fit well with a user pays model, and government needs to pay more for them to work. So smart city strategies need to have regard to how you pay for things as well. Finally, just a last point to that. You can have every council in Australia having a smart city strategy, and 80% of it will be the same. As Jonathan said, as people, we generally have the same ambitions. The difference is, how does it relate to your area? And for the people on the call, how will people take advantage of the opportunity provided by this initiative in delivering these outcomes? So, in other words, how will business do more because of this? How will the community live better because of this? How will we manage resources? And I think to the people on the call, don't underestimate your advocacy, and your participation makes it easier for council to then advocate again on your behalf, to fix those black spots and to attract funding from state and federal governments to do more in your area. But they're the lessons so far that we've seen in our projects.
Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate you sharing those with us today. And there's lots of food for thought, I think, for our participants who have joined us online this morning. I'm going to jump to Jackie and throw her the last question for her. And I believe we have quite a few questions coming in for Jackie, but I'll get her to answer this one first, and then we'll jump into the chat box. So Jackie, on a local level here on the Central Coast, we know that collaboration and partnership are key. It's a no-brainer. If you were to identify projects that can contribute to the future city here on the coast, what would those projects look like?
Okay, so just jumping back to something that Jonathan and Michael both touched on is like a true smart city project really just has to do with it. It's my old favorite classic old man phrase, but it's to anyone holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail. The same concept is really applied in smart cities. So you can't take something like our commuter issue that we're dealing with and just throw roads at it. That's not the solution. So what's driving us on that commuter project is really has spawned the 100 gigabyte per second project that we're working on. So for us, the driving force behind that project is the values that we have of community, environment, the economy, which is really equality and accessibility for people to be able to live it the way they want to live. And also the quality of life of both the community and the individual, the family system. So although that is very much a transportation issue, the way that we're tackling that is through a digital connectivity network. So the goal of that is to really attract those businesses to the Central Coast. So we have a really talented workforce who just so happens to leave every day. And we want to retain those individuals to give them that choice back to work where it is that they live. So that's I guess our take on a smart city project where we're using different tools to fix a problem that normally you wouldn't think that they go hand in hand, but as long as you keep those same values behind you, you can use different tools to fix that. So that's going to be a priority of ours over the next year. We're hoping that the digital connectivity network will come sooner than that, of course. That's what we're planning for. Again, that is a collaboration between all levels of government. And of course, you can bring the horse to water, basically. We can bring that digital network, which is a physical infrastructure line here, but the ones who actually need to activate that are private businesses. So that comes both from the ground level of employees really wanting that and driving that message that they want to work where it is that they live for all of those value reasons. And as well, it's also from the business perspective of the new way of working and the model that is no longer that centralized model, but more the decentralization model, and really setting up here and making that choice and that move. So that's how the business community could help us. It does require many different partnerships from government and private businesses as well. But I'd say that's probably the best answer I could give to that question. I'm sure there's many questions now popping up.
So we might go to some of those questions.
Yes, there is quite a few questions.
One where probably.
I'll start at the top. So there's been quite a lot of chatter here on the chat, which is fantastic, and we like the fact that everybody's interacting with each other. But David has suggested that will we look towards Sydney in terms of tech and being smart, or will we here on the coast lead the way across for the whole of New South Wales? And I'd just like to put a two bobs worth in there. I think we are actually leading the way. And then a little bit further down, we've got an anonymous person has put up, ironically, given the speaker comments, the Central Coast campus has been at the forefront globally in championing innovation. And that has been the case here on the coast for many, many years. So I think we are really well positioned, and our businesses are well positioned to support council. But more importantly, we have to, as a community, understand that it isn't up to council to lead, it's up to council to support. Mm-hmm. And then us as businesses and the community to really sort of jump in that back end and identify those gaps, opportunities, and work in partnerships, not necessarily formal partnerships, but informal collaborations. Moving forward to really have smart cities happen from both ends. It can't just be top down, and it can't be bottom up.
And it's interesting to hear that, because I mean, innovation is really just ideas from the individuals at those organizations, and we have about 44,000 of those individuals that are going into Sydney every day. So they actually are Central Coast resident ideas. Just the place that they're actually undertaking that process happens to be outside of this area. So it's the people, and we have a very highly skilled, highly talented workforce here. So there's the possibilities are really limitless for us.
And we're also heard from council considered has council considered partnering with Australian Urban Observatory. Also governance, independent governance on planning involvement, the importance of ensuring that planning involvement is based on factual input. Has COVID caused us to become sitters in front of screens instead of cities? And another one is really good, COVID impact on what Ettalong looks like on a weekend now, and how many dog walks there and families and the reports back from that. So I think there's been twofold. Yes, we have become sitters and sitting in front of screens, but we've also become quite active because we needed to. So there's some fantastic questions coming in. So keep them coming in. We are coming up to soapbox time very soon, so don't forget to drop any projects in there as well. But if you, and I've got a question here myself. So tech drives progress, and Aaron has actually pointed out here that, cities themselves aren't actually smart, but people are. So how do we activate those people here? And how do we connect them so that they are exposed to what is happening leading forward?
That might be a good question for Jonathan
to answer.
In your experience.
So it kind of goes back to that big theme of let's bring everybody into the conversation and let's find ways to be inclusive. Remember, not everybody in the city has access to the internet still. Not everybody has access to a computer, and not everybody, even those that have internet and computers, know how to use the technology. So we still have to have in-person activities. I've seen very interesting things being done where a city manager will go to a coffee shop and invite constituents to meet with him or her in the coffee shop on a given day or a given morning, just to chat about issues. But you know what really matters to people? People care, and they want the invitation. They want to be invited. And there's a very marked difference between that community that has made a overt decision to say, we want lots of voices, we want to reflect the needs of every part of our society, and those that sort of take the lead and sort of move forward like they have a sense of what the needs are. So there's that invitation. Then there's the forums and platforms. It can be everything from in-person, which I would encourage, and with social distancing, of course. And then there's all the collaboration platforms and digital platforms for activities. When I was in the city of Palo Alto, we used a platform called Open City Hall. And Open City Hall allowed people to raise issues. Folks could vote, kind of vote up or down on an issue. I will say this, though, one lesson from this. If you're using a collaboration platform as a city leadership and you do elicit input, you better do something about it, because people will hold you to it. And that lack of action will result in a lack of credibility, which then holds up all your efforts. So, we're not short of ways to engage people. There's lots of ways. What we're short of is the will and the enthusiasm and the invitation. And we've got to do a lot more of that.
Absolutely agree. I love the Open City Hall concept, and so does Jackie. I could see her nodding. It's a really, really good idea, but absolutely with you on the accountability side as well. I'll pass to Jacinta, who has a question, I think, for Michael.
So Melissa has asked, has suggested accessibility is key. In your current experience in deploying these type of projects, how dependent is accessibility on the project, and what's your experience based around that?
Yeah, I think the critical principle is, you've got to do this for all, not for most. 'Cause every time you pick most, you leave people behind, and before long, you've created those who get to access this and those who can't, and it's being subsidised or funded by everybody. So the digital inclusion element, it includes connectivity issues. It includes hardware, whether people need a smartphone and a credit card. You know, something as simple as you know, being able to load your credit card on your phone and to tap on to get the train. I mean, that's great, but if you don't have a mobile phone and you don't have a credit card, you can't do that. And before you know it, you're struggling to find a place where you can buy a ticket. You know, so you need to have the whole spectrum of users in mind when you're considering these initiatives, and you need to define ways to enable those who are not as I won't say mature. It's more a question of that access. They don't have the same level of access, still being able to take part in the initiatives that are being delivered. There are peak bodies that have been developed both locally and globally who are advocating for people who are in these situations. So there's an opportunity to look at best practice, there's guidance, but even just authentic communication and engagement when you're developing the project should pick this up and should give you that hygiene test so you can say, well, for this to be successful, I need to have regard to these issues raised by these constituents.
There's a number of other different questions here too that are quite big, but what we'll do is we'll circulate those and see whether or not we can answer them later. But there is one here, you know, Michael, have you got any noteworthy smart city projects that you've seen in response to COVID regionally?
Yeah, look, we've been working on one to look at footpath widths and active transport corridors to look at how you can socially distance and move without being in a car or public transport. So it's looking at COVID-safe routes between places of interest. There's the COVID data sharing experience has been understated, you know, in the Australian context, and I'm sure Jonathan would agree compared to the States. We've done a remarkable job of data sharing and collaboration across government. We've got a situation where someone can be tested, a positive result is known, and it's communicated widely which areas you should be mindful of, avoid, which are being cleaned. And that is an enormous data sharing innovation that's happened over the last 6 months, where you've got arguably sensitive data because it relates to an individual. It's being de-identified, shared, mapped, you know, it's publicly available. There's lots of different ways that it's being visualized. And I think, going back to Jackie's point about don't waste the crisis, I think there's an opportunity to keep that level of cooperation and collaboration and scale it to other parts of the data sharing story.
We are at such early stages with COVID and our response to COVID. And Shari has suggested here that, you know, the Spanish flu actually changed the way we designed houses with a hand washing facility at the front door. So I think we're yet to see some of the repercussions from COVID-19 in the design world as it rolls out. But being in such early stages, 6 months of COVID impact, I still think we've pivoted well, but there's more to come.
Yep, agreed.
And good point, Michael, on the data as well. Like, you see it from all the premiers, you know, they've got their infographics, and it's pretty kind of cool seeing it presented that way. Jonathan, we'll be heading into our soapbox in a couple of minutes, but you know, you're our first international guest, and it's been so awesome having you on. So I just wondered, were there any final comments or words of wisdom that you wanted to leave us with as we embark kind of in our early stages of looking at a smart city?
Well, first, you know, thank you for this. I consider this a huge privilege. It's been lovely to be with you. It's fantastic to see all the technology working. You know, we take it for granted a little bit, but there's a lot of cool tech that makes all of this happen. And I'm confident you have audience from around Australia, but probably a few folks from around the world too. So it's quite remarkable. Love the conversation. I've been really impressed with what I've heard from the other panelists and from all of you in terms of where you're at and how you're thinking about issues. It's not a surprise at all, of course. As Michael said, you know, access to knowledge now is being democratized. You know, there's nothing that we have here in the US that, you know, you don't have or can't access, and the same goes for, you know, Europe and Africa and everywhere else now. So there's a huge big plus on access to information with still a little distance to go. You know, I don't know if I have anything huge to sort of say to you right now. Sometimes it's the little things, you know, it's the little steps we take. And so let me see if I can come up with maybe one or two areas of wisdom. One would be, let's not separate climate from cities. Let's ensure that those are the same topic. You know, I like to think of the topic as smart and sustainable cities. Although my book, there was no room for the word sustainable, so I had to leave that out. But smarter and sustainable cities, I think, go hand in hand. So let's be sure that we're recognizing and integrating our solutions for both, because they both play on each other. I think that's really key. Second will be, this is a time, the fourth industrial revolution, this is our time that we're going through. This is an opportunity for bold ideas. And I'm talking about the ideas that when you first say it, everyone thinks you're crazy, but after a few weeks, maybe after a few months, it's not so crazy, right? You know, Hyperloop, whilst at first people said that's a wacky idea from Elon Musk, well, we see some experimentation, some innovation. We don't know if it'll work, but people are building it, building parts of it. So it's time to be bold too. But on the little side, you know, the little things we can do, and this is often somewhat unpopular. I say, for example, we can eat less meat. You know, we can make that choice tomorrow. And you might, I'm looking at reactions there, you might be thinking, what's that got to do with smart cities? It has everything to do with smart cities, and it's everything to do with how we live, about the health of cities, the health of each other, about urbanization and you know, how we manage our rural side, because that's the other side of the equation. And it also has a huge amount to do with the climate emergency. So something as little as just reducing your meat consumption can change the world. So I wouldn't lose sight of the small things too. There's the big things and the small things. With that, thank you again. It's been such a privilege. Thank you for the opportunity.
It's our absolute pleasure, I promise. It's been great. Thank you so much. And definitely all for those little, the micro changes that we can make. I think that's a good point. And before we jump into the soapbox, Michael, were there any kind of final words that you wanted to say? It's been so great to have you on board as well.
Cheers. Look, momentum and identity. I mean, they're the two things that I'd like us to think about. There's a lot of momentum in New South Wales, and with council, the state government's doing a lot. But it needs to be part of the identity of the coast. You know, the aspirations and ambitions, people really need to want this. They need to be hungry for it. They need to project it, and it will come. It'll come because the momentum's there. So the opportunity for the people on the call is to keep working with council, to keep stressing that this is something that they want, and to be consistent with the messaging. You are one council in one region, and that is something that is quite unique in an Australian context. So, you know, that question before, do we look to Sydney? Sydney's got 36 councils. You know, one council, one region, make it work. The world's your oyster.
I love that. And that's really positive. We have so many opportunities. We are a really large council, but we can do amazing things together with our community. So finally, Jackie, it's been lovely to have you here. You've got so many good insights, and that was the injection of all these cool ideas. Jackie does have lots of the bold, amazing ideas. So it's been so great to have you. Any final words that you want to say to our guests or participants today?
I'd say just on the same theme, keep thinking bold, new ways of doing things as a business. join your local chambers, get involved, think of yourself in a different way. You could be a tourism operator, team up with another business and offer something really unique. I think it's just that collaboration piece is key going forward.
Excellent. Thanks, Jackie. So we'll move into the soapbox. Our first person that we have is Timothy Grout. So Timothy, you have 30 seconds. We've just got our tech guys all behind the scenes sorting out all the audio. So hopefully that should, you should be live now. I think you need to unmute, Timothy, just so that we can hear you. This is just that awkward moment where you wait. Okay, maybe we'll go to our second person to see if that works. So the second person we have on the soapbox is Courtney. Is it Courtney? Oh, Courtney Malloy. Hi, Courtney. So if you can unmute and make sure your mic's on. Yes.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you. This has been a really great conversation. So thank you so much. I just wanted to share about our research project. We are wanting to talk to small business owners about the impact of COVID-19 upon them personally. We've had some really great interest from around New South Wales, but I'd really like to make sure that we get some Central Coast voices in there. So I've put up my email in the chat. It's courtney.malloy@newcastle.edu.au. If there are any small businesses out there who would be interested in having a chat, that would be fantastic.
Thank you so much, Courtney. We also send out the recording of this Zoom session, and with that email that I'll send out, we'll make sure that we add in the link to the research that you're doing so that people can jump on board with that. Should we have one more try? I'm not sure if Timothy's still there. Okay, no. So I think that was all for the soapbox. Were there any final questions from the chat?
No, there's a lot of fantastic statements in here. Yeah, people need to want it and be hungry for it, for this to work. Thanks, Paula. Great statement from Ricardo. Great conversation. Thanks to all the panelists for the insights and inspiration. And then in quotes, one region, one council, the world is our oyster. Thank you.
That's great.
Yeah, some great insights on how businesses can work with government and the community. So that's from Katrina from Wyong Regional Chamber of Commerce. Yeah, so there's a lot of really, really good comments there. Lots of thank yous and lots of congratulations on some really good conversations. So thank you to everybody for your input. There is a number of different projects happening here on the coast that we'll bring to the forefront once again. There's the centralcoasteconomy.com.au website. Definitely jump on that. All of the most recent projects are on there, as well as the task force and what the Central Coast Task Force is working through post-COVID. And it's a website full of resources. It's got a range of grants on it, a local government, state government and federal government programs, and some grant opportunities as well. Business support workshops are also on there. Don't forget the Bigger Backyard Central Coast. This is our way of keeping our economy stable and growing that. At the moment, I think from memory, we've cracked the 500. Congratulations. So we've got more than 500 businesses on there, and we are hit something around $71.4 million worth of economic impact across a 12-month project. That's with the kick-on effects of, with every dollar spent locally, there's actually a trigger of $3 return. So we're building jobs, we're building businesses here on the coast just through that project. So continue on it, and I challenge you, if you have not yet registered your business on Bigger Backyard Central Coast, I absolutely ask you to do so. Jacqueline, is there many projects that you have got coming out or at the moment leading into maybe Small Business
Yes,
Month?
we have October Small Business Month that we're setting up for right now. It's all on digital activation. It will be fully online. We're looking to help businesses here on the coast, small businesses in particular, and in our town centers upskill. And that could be on the spectrum of even some don't even have an email address at this point, all the way up to figuring out SEO and all those Google Analytics that go along with it and social media. So we're looking forward to that.
And there's also a number of different small business or business projects going on through the Small Business Month in October. So definitely touch base with all of your Chamber of Commerce. They'll be running out various different projects as well as Business Australia. I think that's about it.
Thank you. So just want to say thank you so much to everybody that's joined us today. It's been amazing to have you all. Very special thanks to Jonathan Reichenthal, Michael Komninos, and Jackie Svadis as well. And as always, my wonderful co-host who's really helped me today with my voice, Jacinta, thank you.
No problem.
And it would be remiss if I didn't thank as well our support crew. You can't see them, but every month they're here with us. So thank you, Phil and Paul. You guys are amazing. And also my wingman, Scotty, over there in the corner, and Dominique upstairs, who's helped us monitor the chat group as well. So our next breakfast is on the 17th of September. And we're looking at future of industry, which I think is a really nice flow on from looking at cities now, the future of industry. So we look forward to having you there. And you all have an early mark. So thank you so much.